Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first event of the 150th year celebration of Mama Charlotte-Maxeke. We express our gratitude to the governing party, ANC, for declaring 2021 as the year of Charlotte-Maxeke. The Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute welcomes you to this afternoon's dialogue. Please welcome AME Church Representative, Presiding Elder Reverend Joyce Dembu to the stream for an opening prayer.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Let us just get a scripture reading from the book of Proverbs, chapter 11, verse 18. Wicked people do not really gain anything, but if you do what is right, you are certain to be rewarded. Let us just in short take a word or a text out of this and say, sow righteousness. God's kingdom operates on a system of sowing and reaping. If you heard the saying, what goes around comes around. That's really a spiritual principle. What you sow, you will reap. Today's verse tells us that when we sow righteousness, we'll reap a sure reward. What does that mean? Sowing righteousness simply means doing the right thing in the sight of God. It's obeying the word no matter what the circumstances may look like. It means showing kindness even when it's undeserved. It's walking in love, in keeping the peace. When you really want to say something different, when you sow righteousness, you'll reap a sure reward because God himself is going to pay you back. He is the one who will multiply you when you honor him. And I think that is what Charlotte-Maxeke did. She sowed righteousness. Today, keep doing the right thing, even if the wrong thing is happening. Sow righteousness. Stay in faith. Keep believing, because he who promised is faithful, and there's a sure reward in store for you. Charlotte believed in righteousness. She had faith, and because of that, we still celebrate her life and listen to her story. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, this afternoon we come as your children to bring thanks unto you. We come gathered here, Heavenly Father, to come and talk about two people who saw righteousness when they were still alive. Heavenly Father, we ask that you shall bless this dialogue, each and every speaker, bless them with wisdom, give the leaders of this foundation vision that they should carry on in the footprints of Charlotte-Maxeke. Heavenly Father, be with us through this pandemic that we are facing. Send your healing powers down to each and everyone who is within this world. Comfort the families where you have come in with the hand of the death. Comfort the families where they are helping the people that are sick at home. And bless this gathering this afternoon. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute Ambassador and Africa's youngest PhD holder, Dr. Musa Sarombe, to the stream.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. ladies and gentlemen, dignitaries on this platform, as the CMMI, we would like to thank you so much for gracing us at this occasion, this afternoon, this virtual occasion, of course. I'm one of the young professionals around the country who contribute their time to the work of the Institute annually. Kindly allow me to share some of the programs that we conduct, which are aligned with the vision that Charlotte had when she said, "And if you can rise, bring someone with you." This year, as we all are aware of, we are celebrating what would have been the 150th birthday of Charlotte. These are not just celebrations, but a mission to create a lasting legacy. And these projects will not only elevate this icon's name, but rebrand also the history of women and our heritage and make it a point that we have a place in the history of our country and continent. There can be no better time than now to evoke the teaching of Charlotte and the values that she stood for to assist us as we navigate through a number of challenges as a country, continent, and the world. We have taken into consideration the COVID-19 second scourge and the challenges that it poses to us. We will abide by the rules and regulations of the lockdown. Hence, a lot of the programs will have to be virtual, just as this one. In memory of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke and the enormous contributions she made to both South Africans and the international scene, the CMMI has initiated a series of programs to celebrate her achievements, preserve her legacy, promote her teachings, advance the values that she stood for, and also elevate her name. We deem it important for us to connect with all the South African public during this challenging time, especially the challenging time faced by young women and youth in general. Some of our 2021 activities and programs will be carried out during the course of the year entail the following: intergenerational dialogues. The CMMI normally hosts these annually, and the objective is to create a platform for women and men of different generations and from different walks of life to express thoughts and ideas that can move us forward as a country, using the values and other luminaries to impact today's society. We will also have the presidential dialogues that will be reflective to remember and recreate President Charlotte's legacy, mission, beliefs, and teachings. She was a founding president, of course, of the Bantu Women's League and will converse with other past and present presidents as well during these dialogues. The woman, her work, and the call that she left behind are what we will be focusing on during this dialogue. CMMI youth forums as well will take place this year, reminding ourselves of the platforms that were created in the 19th and 20th centuries where Charlotte was actively involved and in some instances had to demand a seat and bulldoze her way to meetings that she was uninvited to. As we all know that she lived in a time where women were precluded from participating in such discussions and activities. However, she didn't allow that to inhibit her. We will also be looking at the rural and urban youth as they come together and lead with leading voices and pressing issues pertaining to African international youth matters. We'll also commemorate the Charlotte Maxeke Week, which will be obviously in conjunction with the AME Church that we know she was a part of. and also the ANC Women's League national program as well. There is planting food for sustenance as well. That's a program that will be taking place to assist communities and ensure that these communities are also led in this regard. That will be presented by the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Also, there's the Women's Movement's March, Bring Others Up. As we may all be aware of, I believe, there is the program Bring Her Up that the CMMI has been hosting for the past several years. And it's important for us to continue carrying the light that has already been carried over the years prior. And this shall be a call to women all over the world to relive the same march that took place in 1956. Meeting points and the route are to be announced at a later stage. This will be a call to activism. Watinta bafazi, watinti mbokod. Also, there will be legacy projects. That is agriculturally based, One Home, One Garden initiative, which will be encouraging our communities to self-feed on organic food and food security. Now, it's important to note even that during this time of COVID, one of the things that has been helpful even to the African continent has been diet itself. And so more than ever before, it's important for us as a continent to take seriously even the indigenous diets that we once followed, because a lot of the processed food that is now obviously commercialized is detrimental to our health and our immune system and its ability to fight off diseases and other comorbidities, such as posed by the COVID-19 virus. Now, also there will be an exchange program with sister institutions. The CMMI, together with the ANC Women's League, will embark on a mission to create relationships with local and international institutions and entities that so we can create exchange programs that empower young women from our country, but also showcase our rich history and heritage to women from other countries. This will also extend to reconnecting and linking with all institutions that are associated with this icon, Charlotte. Of course, the Wilberforce College in South Africa and USA and the AME Church, as I've mentioned before, will be in collaboration with the CMMI to ensure that the legacy of Charlotte is duly commemorated, especially during this year of the 150th celebrations. Now, honoring of 150 women also will take place, those who contributed to the emancipation of women and democratization of our country, continent, and the world at large. We would also approach the National Assembly and Union Building to create a sacred space for this initiative. Now, it's also important for us to acknowledge that there will be merchandise available as well. This merchandise obviously will help us commemorate Charlotte and celebrate the milestone that this year represents, not only in her legacy, but also for us as baton holders, those that she obviously began a work for. And we stand on the shoulders of such giants as Charlotte. And it is indeed important for us to commemorate her legacy duly. Now, also, we will acknowledge and honor other female icons. We also do have an annual presentation of awards that takes place every year, normally in August. And this is to commemorate the women out there who are doing their part in whatever little way possible to carry on the legacy that great icons such as Charlotte established. And so I would like to also take this opportunity to put it to everyone on this platform as well, some of the work that is also taking place behind the scenes. There is the project which I'm honored to spearhead of the establishment of a girls' school of excellence. And it is important that this school embodies the type of legacy that Charlotte wanted and envisioned for women in the future of this country during the time when she lived. It's important that this school will develop and produce young women who will not only be iconic here in the country in South Africa or the continent, but young women who will be able to, at global level, take their place and be acknowledged and believe that they too have a seat at whatever table that the global space or arena presents. Now, this school will be top of the range, and it is intended that even the quality of educators who will be sourced to teach the young girls that will be produced and developed from that school need to be creme de la creme, cream of the crop type of educators that we are looking at joining in on this great initiative. Now, we ask for your diligent support as well, as we all know that it will take a collective effort to see this particular initiative come to fruition. And so we ask that you continue to bear this in mind and support in whatever way that you can. Right now, we are at the point of creating a strategy which will see us through to the culmination of the establishment of this school. And of course, we will keep all relevant stakeholders and those who have pledged their support to anything pertaining to Mom Charlotte's legacy. We will keep you posted as the stakeholders, and we thank you in advance for your earnest support. I would also like to take this time to just say a heartfelt word of gratitude to the ANC, especially to, of course, the ANC Women's League, because that is where Charlotte, of course, emanated. And we just want to express such gratitude to you for declaring this year, 2021, as the year of Charlotte Maxeke. Thank you very much for your audience. I forgot to say that I'm done. Thank you so much. Pardon?
And yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, fellow guests and attendees, interested parties, and all protocols observed. It is my honor and my sincere privilege to be afforded the opportunity to speak and reflect on the life of a giant, not just in South Africa, but in the world. Charlotte Maxeke was a woman who has not only inspired me, but a woman who has inspired many who've come before me and us, but also all women in the world. And as we reflect on the theme of the day, what an educated girl can do, it would be remiss not to show sincere gratitude for the reflections of Dr. Alfred Bitini-Xuma, who penned such a wonderful booklet on the life of Charlotte Maxeke and the sheer giant footprints that she would have left in our world. Upon preparing for this moment, it dawned on me that, it is such a remarkable time, because as themes revisit us, themes of Blackness, themes of women in education, it becomes ever more important as we realize the women who have come before us to lead us up to the point that we're in. So to know her better, is to paint an even more vibrant and vivid image of her character in hues of hope, in hues of courage, in hues of determination, and a will for her to see change beyond her own circumstance, and undoubtedly will be an inspiration for all of us. As a woman who was passionate about the role of education, the first Black woman of our country to obtain a university degree, she made a tremendous imprint in the lives of many, keeping close company with one of the forefathers of civil rights in America, a giant in American and global Black history, W.E.B. Du Bois, who himself achieved a major feat of being named the first African American to obtain a PhD from Harvard University. But underscoring both their education is a remarkable pillar in Black education, that of studying at historically Black colleges in America, and the role that they have played and continue to play in providing educational opportunities and foundations for Black people, rooted in a pride of their own identity and the encouragement to go into the world with great fortitude, a fierce love for change, and armed with an education. Underscoring, so Mannya-Maxeke's legacy is one that can only grow with time. As someone who has had a talent for music and a sharp mind, she both encapsulated her audiences and wowed anyone who came into her own company. She and her sister both, Katie, among others, had the opportunity to wow audiences in England, singing before Queen Victoria and the royal family in the famous Royal Albert Hall in England. So many adventures had led them abroad and gained them much adulation and much acclaim, affording them yet another opportunity this time to travel to the United States. Charlotte traveled to New York first and the opportunity to study at Ohio Wilberforce University was presented to her, the United States' oldest private historically Black university, one that men and women would transcend race and the prevailing social and cultural constructs and norms to pursue their own purpose, something which is quite compelling because of all that she would have achieved in what followed. So many will know that she too was very intrinsically woven into bringing the AME Church to South Africa, to teaching and preaching the gospel and as a devoted member. Following which, she opened up a school in Johannesburg, continued to evangelize. Before then, she embarked on a political journey, one in which she would be seen to found the Bantu Women's League, prescient to the ANC Women's League. You know, it is also in seeing how she bravely led delegations to the then Prime Minister Louis Botha to protest the current circumstances that were facing women at the time, speaking about issues like the past laws, speaking about the social conditions of women and girls in the home, and advocating for women from a very early political position. Further, even in reflecting upon her essays, it is easy to see her compassion come through and pour into her writings as she aimed to still further the values of Christianity, to bridge the two races in our divides. Now, I can go on forever reflecting on her legacy and her achievements, her role in advocating and advancing women's rights, her writings, but the 10 minutes that I have would simply not be enough. So I'm going to take this opportunity to share what Charlotte Maxeke has meant to me. As somebody who's a descendant, as somebody who was also born with somewhat of a musical talent and sings, I was able to learn very early on that something in me would allow me to sing and also pursue an education. I studied in New York University. I studied my master's in engineering and can only think of people who've managed to do something similar prior to my journey. In walking through her footsteps, I can easily say that without the education, I definitely don't think some of the platforms that I've had would be afforded to me. And so I do believe in the work that the Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute is going to do in bringing about education and opening up of schools and the programming that is to proceed following this It is important to see how these efforts, led by Ms. Charlotte in the late 1800s, have poured in generations on through her spirit into us. And as we endeavor to continue her legacy, that we remember that we too will have the opportunities and the responsibility to further these opportunities to people that succeed us. So in so saying, I would love to read a small excerpt on when she wrote about a segregated life for women and women's rights in South Africa. So that she said, the woman, the wife, is the keystone of the household. She holds a position of supreme importance, for she's not directly and intimately concerned with nurturing and upbringing of children of the family. She's entrusted with the future generation. She is their first counselor and teacher, and in her rests the responsibility of implanting in the flexible minds of young people the principles and the teachings of modern civilization. And so to close, I'd like to leave you with a quote by Utata Nelson Mandela, that education is the most powerful weapon in which you can use to change the world. Thank you. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, a leader of the African National Congress Women's League. She has previously been Minister of Women in the Presidency and Minister of Social Development. Please welcome ANC Women's League President, Mabatamile Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Lebohang. Let me firstly thank the Institute for inviting us and the other participants. I've seen the Premier of the Eastern Cape is participating, as well as Dr. Fraser Geraldine Munikete, who is also our leader. We are this year celebrating the life of Mannya-Maxeke, and I think it is befitting to call it the year of unity, renewal, and reconstruction in the year of Mannya-Maxeke. And if Charlotte was a man, there would be Isitwalandwe, Siyaparangwe. But I noticed that this is not there, but we had tried to work very hard to convince comrades, and therefore this was another gain in the ANC and in the country. And then secondly, this is a very important year. We are celebrating 150 years of two giants in the ANC. President Langalibalele Dube, as well as President Charlotte Maxeke. President Charlotte Maxeke was an intellectual, a visionary, a hard worker, exemplary, led by example, an artist, and a very organic intellectual, because most intellectuals always talk, but practically we don't see what they do on the ground, but she was outstanding. But also we see that she's also known after 1918, when there are big things she did before 1918, when the Bantu Women's League, which was the forerunner of the Women's League, was formed. She led demonstrations, protests after the promulgation of the 1913 Land Act, but also marched to the Bloemfontein Council to ban IDs. When the formal defiance campaign was launched by the African National Congress. But also, she worked with women from different sectors, different racial groups. We see that at some stage she worked with women from Vereeniging that were hawkers. And amongst them, there was a 16-year-old woman, Munswami Mudia, who ended up dying in Pietermaritzburg because she was arrested and could not stand the conditions and the treatment in prison in Pietermaritzburg. But what is also important is that on their way to Pietermaritzburg, they passed Newcastle. And in Newcastle, people were not allowed to move. There was a curfew. And more particularly, people of Indian origin were not allowed to walk freely around the Newcastle. And so on their way, they mobilized men that were working in mines and told them to drop their shovels and fight for their rights. And we've heard about a meeting with the Prime Minister. But also, we nearly had a huge nightmare. We must thank the writers that have researched. The writer, firstly, Zubaydia Jafta, who wrote the book Beauty of the Heart, and Dr. Thozamile April, who studied about women and has deepened our understanding of Charlotte Maxeke and the women she worked with, because Charlotte worked with a number of women, and that is why we have to take this year as the year of all South African women. Let's try and ensure that we move our struggles forward and walk in the footsteps of women that came before us. We nearly only knew about Charlotte Maxeke, the singer, and the story of her addressing Queen Elizabeth about the conditions of the people of South Africa is very important, but it was not there. Researchers had to look for information, and they found it. And I think there is more we can still find about Charlotte Maxeke, but we must not only read about Charlotte Maxeke. We must try and have more researchers that are going to tell us about Madi Hall Xuma, that are going to tell us about the wife of the first president of the ANC, who was a good writer and a fundraiser. We must know about our leaders and the role they played in the struggle, and that they were feminists themselves. They fought for the rights of women. And they were rebels when there was a need to be rebellious. And also, they were able to break the ceiling. Let's look at Charlotte going abroad and studying in Wilberforce, performing very well, but also she was yes, that was the University of African American Intellectuals and other people that were intellectuals, but she was able to associate herself with correct people that were dealing with the issues of human rights, as well as women's rights. So they also found a very dynamic woman in Charlotte. Others have said what W.E.B. Du Bois said about Charlotte Maxeke. And we agree, I think we all agree with them. Even the comrades, she worked with A.B Xuma. The newspapers at the time spoke about her dynamism. And she was an all-rounder and was able to work as a missionary as well as a politician and dealt with social issues. She worked very far from 1955. She had already started with working with women from other racial groups, worked with women in the women's missionary, where they were all races. And at some stage, she had to go to the Cape, have meetings. They were called standing committee meetings, where she argued with men. And we are better, we are many in meetings. And we must be performing much, much better than her, because she was alone in very difficult meetings. But also, she motivates Reverend Mahaban, who becomes the ANC of the president of the ANC twice. And she was also the co-founder of the National Council of African Women that was formed after the All-African Convention of Women that took place in Bloemfontein. And this shows that women have always worked together. And that is why if you look into our history, where we have the responsibility of charter, we have the Women's March in 1956, we have the Malibongwe Conference just before the unbanning of political parties, we have the National Women's Coalition, as well as the PWMSA. So we are built on a strong foundation. But also, let us think about what Charlotte would be doing now. She would be ensuring that we use our 52% representation as women for the development of the poor and for the development of women as well as children, both boys and girls, but also because she worked with boys or with children that were in conflict with the law. She would be working with both boys and girls and trying to teach young men about gender equality and the emancipation of women. So we have a responsibility of ensuring that both the private and public sector have women represented at all levels so that they can speak for themselves. She would be dealing with the issues of equal pay for the work of equal value, the inclusion of women of the women's free work in the GDP, but also involvement of women in finance committees, budget committees, in the payroll, because we are not there. And she would be ensuring that the development, that the financial development institutions play their role of building Black business, both small and big, as well as cooperatives, not these small cooperatives, big cooperatives that will be big industries that will provide whether food or textile or whatever for the country that is made in South Africa. And she would be doing that because women are an asset in the country. They contribute 80% of their remuneration to the income of families. She would be ensuring that GBV programs are funded and that women are part of the fourth industrial revolution. And also that we would be dealing with the issues of climate change. But one other thing that I think is important, it would be a big mistake for the ANC not to hand over the membership of the ANC to Charlotte Maxeke, because she was at the first conference as persona non grata. We also know that Mam Charlotte and Mam Josie Palmer. Mam Josie was the first woman in the SACP and worked fully with Mam Charlotte Maxeke. And those are women that we cannot leave out of the African National Congress for the role they have played in the struggle. And so we have to try and ensure that Ma Charlotte's year brings about big change in South Africa. There must be a big revolution for the good of the country. And it must not be construed as women that want to control men. We know that some men and even women, because we grow gradually, want to protect patriarchy. But the time has come for us to ensure that gender equality is seen in action. I have a pleasure to introduce to you Phoebe Potgieter, who is the General Manager at the ANC headquarters and is the former Chief of Staff and the advisor of the former chairperson of the AU. She was the first Secretary General of the ANC Youth League, and she is playing a big role in different fora, but also she is a gender activist. She has written a number of papers on women and the youth. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Comrade President. Thank you very much for that introduction, and the Program Director, and all my esteemed panelists, all protocols observed. Thank you very much to the Charlotte Maxeke Foundation for organizing this very innovative way of engaging with the life of Comrade Charlotte Maxeke in the form of this dialogues between presidents, because I think it's a novel way of looking at a particular era in our history, but also looking at the comparisons. And if you look at the two peoples whose life we are celebrating today, of course, many of our previous speakers have spoken about the achievement of Mannya-Maxeke, the first African BSc graduate, a delegate to the ANC conference, founding conference, a scientist, a church leader, an educationist, a political activist and leader, a champion for women's rights, a cultural activist, a trade unionist, because she's also organized farm workers and domestic workers and play a role in the founding of the ICU. So in a sense, the kind of person that she represents in terms of that all-roundedness and the different areas that she's involved in is what we're celebrating this year as we celebrate 150 years of her since her birth. The second person that we are talking about today is Dr. A.B Xuma. And he was also first, in a lot of ways, the first African medical doctor. And he was born in 1893, so quite a couple of years after Comrade Charlotte Maxeke. And he also graduated way after him. So in a sense, she laid the foundation and he followed into her footsteps. He was the president of the ANC from 1940 to 1949. And under his presidentship, quite a number of achievements was happened. For example, the fact that for the first time during his presidency, women became full members of the ANC, something that Mam Charlotte didn't live to see. The formation of the ANC Youth League happens under his presidency. Comrade Nelson Mandela credits him for the revitalization of the ANC in the 1940s, reviving its membership, its finances, its structures. And of course, it was also under his presidency that the adoption of the African Claims document, and he was the one that wrote the pamphlet in 1930, What an Educated African Woman Can Do. But in addition to that, also at the All African Convention, spoke about Mam Charlotte Maxeke as a woman who represent as a representative of freedom of the people. And it's therefore quite befitting that we look at celebrating these two lives today and how those lives intersect. But I want to really talk today about the role the importance of celebrating the life of Mam Charlotte Maxeke in the context of writing women back into history. That is, it could have been very easy if it wasn't for the fact that in exile, the ANC Women's Section named a creche in Morogoro after Mam Charlotte Maxeke. The fact that the women's movement was determined to unearth all these women that made a contribution and to be able to say that we need to write them back into history. There's a quote that I want to read by a woman. Her name is Xing Cheng, and she's the editor of something called the Forgotten Women series, and she's wrote a book, Forgotten Women, the Leaders, Forgotten Women, the Scientists, Forgotten Women, the Writers, the Artists, etc. And in one of the introductions, she writes this about how women are forgotten in histories. And I want to quote from her saying that everyone knows a forgotten woman. I'm talking about the women that we hold dear in our hearts, the ones we raise in conversations over a drink or two, the ones whose names are usually met with a look of surprise. A furrowed brow and the cry, "Oh, I've never heard of her before, how weird." The truth is, it is far more likely that women have been forgotten than men. All you need to do is to look at the last 2,000 years of proof. The history books are awash with dudes in togas or academic dress, pontification on subjects like science, literature, and politics. And when women do make a brief appearance, they contextualize by their gender. Here's the female Socrates, And I think from our own history, if one look at the history of Sissy Gul, there's very little written about it, but we all know that she was the daughter of Dr. Abdurrahman. But the kind of contribution that she made is not often, even when there are biographies about there. She went on to say that women only occupy around 0.5%, not even 1%, of recorded history. Given that the fairer sex make up about half of the world's population at any given moment, it begs the question, what on earth were the women doing that they were written out of history? As it turns out, she said, women were toiling, researching, exploring, and fighting for their place in the world. They were in combat on the battle lines, making earth-shattering discoveries and actively participating in the great revolutions, intellectual, scientific, and social political of their respective centuries. In fact, women were doing all of the above on top of battling the sexism and prejudice that they encountered, end of quote. And in fact, this probably could be a quote that referred to the life of Charlotte Maxeke, even though she couldn't, the ANC, when in 1912 decided that women can't have full rights, we will be auxiliary members, she didn't let that deter. She went on, formed the Women's Bantu League, she organized women, she mobilized, she led deputations, she wrote, she struggled. And I think that is the reality about women's history throughout the centuries, that despite the fact that we are written out of formal history and we only represent less than 1% of history, women continue to do all of these things. Now, one of the questions that's often asked is, why does it matter? So, we don't write about you guys when we talk about architecture, or when we talk about the African Renaissance, or when we talk about African history, or when we talk about global history, art, music, etc., etc. But the important issue is that representation do matter. That representation do matter because the fact that women makes up half of the population of the world means that if they are not represented, then it means that their needs and their issues, as we see in the system of patriarchy, are simply not being considered. And in fact, their oppression is being made seen as normalized. And therefore, if we want to build a non-sexist and equal world, we need to make sure that we unearth the stories of women. And I want to add my voice to the comrades that thank Zubaydah Jaffer for writing the biography of Mam Charlotte Maxeke, as well as Dr. Tozama April for looking at unearthing the history of women. And this is something that we need to do more. We need to look at the history of African women. We need to look at the history of women throughout the ages and the contribution that they made in different spheres of life, as Mam Charlotte Maxeke has done. This year we celebrate 150 years of her birth and the contributions that she made. The priorities for the year has identified that we need to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic, that we need to ensure that our economy recover, but not back to the old normal, where women's contribution are not recognized, where the gender pay gap still exists, where women still get paid and are found in the informal sector and so forth. Another priority is around basic services and local government. And then, of course, building a better Africa and the renewal and building an ethical leadership and cohesion in our society. And in all of those issues, women have an important role to play. We can learn from the example of Mam Charlotte Maxeke, and we should continue to do so as we continue these conversations with the different presidents of the ANC, something that over the 109 years of the existence of the organization, we had 13 presidents, all of them male, and it's therefore important that we do have that conversation with them and ask the question, on your watch as a president, what have you done for the 50% of the population who struggled, who researched, who fought, who innovated, and who played a critical role in the revolutions of the century, but also previous centuries, and building on the footsteps of Mam Charlotte Maxeke. So thank you very much to the Institute. for the work that they've done, working with others to be able to keep this legacy alive. And I think that as a society, not just as a South African society, but as an African society, the continent, global humanity, this is one of the examples that we should look at as part of the forgotten history that played such a critical role. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. Our next speaker is Dr. Tozama April. Dr. Tozama April is called the next generation scholar. She writes on women and feminist historiography with a dissertation titled Theorizing Women, the Life of Charlotte Maxeke. She is currently working on the broad historiography of colonialism in the Eastern Cape and on the decolonial and nationalist thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ma Batabile Dlabini. And also greetings to esteemed panelists and broader participants in this very important occasion. I also wish to extend a very heartfelt, really warm regards to the Institute for having sustained the legacy of Ma Charlotte Maxeke, and also wish to extend a sense of gratitude to all our icons, the women before us who made it possible for us to have these kinds of conversations. As you will notice, I am on the way. I'm kind of getting into this conversation while on a route to Queenstown, which is where Ma Charlotte Maxeke cut her teeth in conversations that shaped much of the political discourse of South Africa in the early 1900s. This is where she attended the conference of women of all Africans that was held not far from where I am, which is about 20 km from here, in Undlovukazi, where Africans met to discuss their plight as they were feeling the pinch of colonial intrusion. Just by way of introducing this very important, really historical figure, I'll limit my conversation to two aspects of her life, which I think are really befitting for these kinds of conversation. Just by way of recap from last year's conversation, which we had between Ma Charlotte Maxeke and Utata Usol Plaji at Kimberley, we came up there with an understanding of how Charlotte Maxeke asserted herself at that conference, the very first conference in 1902, where she demanded to know whether women were welcomed in the conversations that were taking place, having noticed, of course, the extent to which women were not in attendance. So, recapping on that conversation, I think it is also befitting to go beyond her name to begin to identify some of the traits that made her stood out as a leader in society. And I want to deal with mainly two things. On one hand, it is her abilities and also her talents. But combined, these two for me present an image of someone who had established a tradition of service to others. So as we celebrate Mama Maxeke today, I'm reminded of her contribution to society, which for me are beginning to show that Maxeke was indeed someone who established a tradition of service to others. What a way of building onto that legacy as we traverse the different territories in our society, be it political, social, economic, and all the other challenges that we're facing in our society. For me, I see someone who had established a tradition of service to others, that is in the public sphere. But in education, as someone who has come across Ma Charlotte Maxeke through an academic inquiry, Maxeke for me reorders. She reorders the narratives that have, up to the present, defined the historiography of South Africa. What do I mean by that? It is figures like her who help us comprehend the extent to which colonial modes of thought have kind of impinged on our knowledge economy. The extent to which that figures like her have been rendered unthinkable in the historiography. The fact that we constantly make mention of her as being unknown, as someone whose history has not been written, for me, it highlights the extent to which colonial modes of thought have kind of rendered persons like herself unthinkable in the world of knowledge production. It is reclaiming her traditions, reclaiming her history, that we begin to rethink the scholarship on Black intellectual life, for example, which is where I've kind of pinned her life story. That Maxeke, in the scholarship of Black intellectual life in South Africa, is someone that begins to help us rethink that historiography. That is in the academic sphere. But of course, as I've alluded, in the sphere of public service, she establishes that tradition of service to others. Now let's look at the number of people that she made it possible for them to excel in who they were. Take the example of A.B Xuma, who was also a one-time student of her, whom she mentored and also made it possible that he succeed in his endeavor, becoming the first Black medical doctor in South Africa. Also, Ma Ellen Kuzwayo reflects on this iconic figure in her autobiography, Call Me Woman, that Maxeke was the household name in the Transvaal in the 30s. Also, we're not thinking of Mama Maxeke in isolation, because her activism, she was an individual, yet in a collective. There are other women with whom she worked, women such as Aboma Tembeka Soga. We mention such as Mrs. Masiapoli. There's very little known about these women with whom Charlotte Maxeke worked with. In her study years in the US, she was not alone at Wilberforce. Although they were her juniors, there were also other women such as Ma Tyatyadwa Tansi, who's also from the Eastern Cape. You also had a Johanna House from Cape Town, who were also students in the years of Charlotte Maxeke at Wilberforce. So there's a sense in which her life story has kind of returned to us what the Caribbean scholar David Scott calls a return of figures whom we thought we knew, who can now begin to belong to us in new and interesting ways. We've always known about Charlotte Maxeke as a historical figure, the president of the first president of the Bantu Women's League. But yet, what this occasion does for us, the fact that she has been identified as someone who could be celebrated the whole of this year, as someone that could be celebrated, calls us to begin to rethink what it means to engage a legacy of a figure like herself. So for me, I've kind of simply limited my 10-minute presentation to simply tease out these two aspects of this gigantic figure, which for me, on one hand, help us understand how she established a tradition of service to others, and also her abilities. Yes, someone who established positive representations of African womanhood at the time where colonial narratives were presenting a whole range of negative representations of African women. Now, in that short introductory note, I have kind of simply gathered those two, which I think going forward would help us rethink and also reposition Mama Maxeke, of course, as we've always done. Phoebe, you have also alluded to the fact that the Tanzania kindergarten that was named after her. And in that moment, Mafrini Junala asked a very important question, that who was Charlotte Maxeke, that she demanded that we begin to reflect on her significance in society. Back then in the 80s already, yet today we are still pursuing her legacy, her history in ways that begin to help us, that also caution us about normative descriptions. That in dealing with a figure like her, we are beginning to see how she reorders. She calls us to rethink the positions that we've already established, but also points to areas of intervention that could help us rethink the whole project of building the nation in various spheres. Because Maxeke's life is not limited to only one particular space. She is someone who helps us have a broader view of society. Women are always there's the perception that they belong to a domestic space, yet Maxeke revolutionized that domestic space early in the 20s and 30s already. Yes, someone who reorders native administration of urban areas to rethink their policies towards the notion of an African urban family, which is something that the government of the time denied back then. So her inputs in the 20s and 30s have a society that embraces humanity in its holistic sense. So it is those lessons that one draws from a life of someone whom, for me, I define her as someone who exceeds the script of native docility, because much of our history has been kind of balkanized and packaged into neatly designed categories. But what Maxeke does, she destabilizes those categories. Take, for example, how Maxeke deliberated as early as the 1890s on the question of education. For Maxeke, when she presented her case in the print media in the UK about the need to have free education to Africans in South Africa, very much ahead of her time in the 1890s already. So it is those lessons that are now beginning to help us rethink our present conundrum. I thank you. Thank you.
All right. Greetings to the House at large, dignitaries, the leadership and my leadership and President, Comrade Bathabile Dlamini, the Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute for giving me the platform to speak. All protocols observed. Dr. Alfred Bettini Xuma, the Pathfinder, who made it possible for us young Black medical doctors to point directly at the genesis. Without question, he was a pioneer. One cannot walk the path less traveled without being a visionary. This encompasses all things. Throughout medical school, we are taught to follow clear directions and protocols. A leader must learn to follow in order to lead successfully. It comes as no surprise that Dr. A.B Xuma became President General of the African National Congress for 9 consecutive years. Leadership is inspired. I therefore imagine the 9 years he occupied office was no mistake and could not exist without the unwavering support of his subordinates who were also his equals. One cannot learn without engaging with one's peers, both like-minded and those that go against one's position. This speaks volumes of the man who submerged himself amongst brothers, stewarding the formation of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I speak firstly for myself as a Black writer who was told to choose a real career due to historical, socio-economic situation in South Africa that today still needs to be remedied. Secondly, I speak for all Black writers who receive validation of their aspirations through him, for he was a creative, penned black on white pages and made words come to life. I pay homage to his wife and widow, Maddie Xuma, who ensured his death was not in vain, sharing his work in word, making him eternally accessible. I cannot sing the praises of any man without acknowledging a woman I would consider to be cut from the same cloth. Her name makes up Charlotte-Maxeke Academic Johannesburg Hospital, an epitome of everything she was, an academic foremost, an activist. For those in the field of healthcare today, her name symbolizes opportunity and selfless service to my colleagues present and those who will follow. Now that's power. She too crossed thresholds considered impossible and not open to faces that looked like mine. She acknowledged her innate strength as a woman. She did not waste her time in competition with men. Rather, she remained focused. A devout religious leader who forged faith for change for us as young women, her predecessors. Her legacy today affords young women the belief that patriarchy must be taken to task and questioned constantly and contested relentlessly. By definition, she epitomized feminism. She took her own chair, took her seat at the table that only men could occupy. She understood the importance of gender equality in her present time and in mine. Black history remains the unspoken truth, failing to occupy South African textbooks. This was to ensure the inferiority complex that still lives within the Black child. The onus lies on government and state, educators, the learned, the elderly, to tell stories of brown faces. The fact that Vasco da Gama anchored at the Cape of Good Hope in 1652 comes to remembrance naturally, without thought, as if breathing. It filled my history and life orientation textbooks throughout my formative years. President Mandela, the late, was the only Black hero I was allowed to have, because I suppose he could not be avoided. That and the degradation of a brown woman, Sarah Baartman, remains etched in my mind. It still remains oppressive. Women today are fashioned as if to be sexual objects that are to be seen and not heard. Comrade Charlotte-Maxeke, however, spoke every time she stood, with her mandate being the right for women to vote, therefore having government over their own lives. I Swechere, Munyayi, Mukaranga, Muirambiru ya Koromo, Muvenda. I remain a minority, subject to nothingness. In 2021, our president-elect, Honorable Cyril Ramaphosa, was not the first amongst the Venda people to wage war against an oppressive system. Knowledge of that would warrant emancipation of my people. It removes us from the status quo as predominantly being victims of stereotypes. Education at all levels would breed contempt of tribalism. We are on a battlefield, subconsciously killing Black history. Unknowingly, we are killing ourselves. I beg to quote a well-known phrase, "History repeats itself," close quote. Knowing this should encourage the divorce of distorted societal norms that subject Black people to the township. The township was designed to prohibit Black people from participating in the economy. Today, I unapologetically ask my Black counterparts to murder the township mentality of being disenfranchised and victims of circumstances that are drenched in poverty. Don't allow yourself that comfort. The onus does not lie solely on government. South Africa is but one of the privileged few that benefit from the social assistance program, the others being Kenya, Swaziland, and Uganda. We are forced by the Black experience of requiring provident funds to eat, the monetary value being the bare minimum. The time is now to find sustainable ways of survival and progress beyond and above that. This requires the youth to be realistic, and more so, intentional in their pursuits of socio-economic emancipation. For there is no freedom that can be found without financial freedom. This was taken in the form of livestock and land, replaced with Bantu education in townships and rural areas. Today, it is fashioned into substandard facilities in those schools that have little to no resources. Albeit there are a few that receive Model C opportunities. Here are a few summarized points of issues and solutions I've thought about. This is job creation, which encompasses government and self. For example, natural resources such as iron are heavily mined in South Africa, traded in the raw form and exported. Subsequently, they are brought back into the country as imports, which we buy for exorbitant amounts. Ironically, a resource that was initially ours. With all due respect, one should question this logic. Find a way to stop this rhetoric without losing allies. This would ensure job opportunities for those subject to unemployment in rural areas. The above also requires individual initiatives that are echoed so often but fall on deaf ears. Namely, 1, growing your own produce. 2, spending less than you earn. And there is a long list of these obvious suggestions. It remains the first step of many steps. Discussing the shortfalls of industry may be controversial, but is necessary. I suggest to reduce the production of meat, the biggest contributor to climate change and the pollution of our landscapes and waterways. Damming the impact of industries that contribute to the destruction of sustainable living must be prioritized. The youth needs to choose to be the difference. In conclusion, please mirror our historical presidents, Dr. A.B Xuma and Mannya-Maxeke, who weren't popular in their ideologies, but are significant today. Dr. Xuma made his house a home for others. Sophia Town Heritage and Cultural Center, sharing information as you acquire it. When you climb up a ladder, extend a hand. He understood the principles of Batu Ele. Keda Charlotte-Maxeke, the 1,088 beds that occupy Charlotte-Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital create jobs today and service people. My colleagues are products of you. My name is Dr. Rofwaras Bechere, the legacy of Mom Charlotte-Maxeke. Just as you are a feminist, an activist, a human rights activist, championing the ills that face rural children and women, including gender-based violence and substance abuse. Every woman's problem is a collective problem. As you were a dedicated ground worker, I commit myself with absolute conviction, and I thank you.
And we thank you, Dr. Rafiwa Rasivichel. And I think the way you spoke about it was, you shared some beautiful reflections in response to the dialogue. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker to get the message from the Department of Sports, Arts and Agriculture, Minister Natim Tetwa, to speak. Oh, my apologies. It was Mr. Vusi Duma, acting DG in the Department of Sports, Arts and Agriculture, my mistake. But I now introduce our next speaker to take us through the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me just do a bit of correction. My name is Vusitemba Ndima. Thank you. Program Director, Mannya-Maxeke families, the Xuma families, the President of the Women's League, Premier of the Eastern Cape Province, the Maxeke Institute, all eminent speakers, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, I represent the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture, who could not be with us today because of commitments he could not postpone. I bring his greetings. We have converged in these platforms to come and continue the celebrations of the life and times of Mama Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, a stalwart of our revolution, an epitome of women's abilities and struggles. People compose or construct their memories using the public language and meanings of culture. In another sense, they compose memories which help them feel relatively comfortable with their lives and which gives them a feeling of composure. As Ben Okri observes in his essay collection, A Way of Being Free, I quote, "It seems to me that the age demands that each man and woman become a light, a fire, a responsible heir to all the veins of freedom and courage that have enabled us to get here, in spite of the forces of darkness all around." End quote. This gathering this afternoon is meant to do precisely this, to allow us to become the responsible heirs of Charlotte Maxeke's legacy and quest for freedom in an age that needed as much courage as we need to arm ourselves with today. To continue with events of this nature help us as society and individuals to deal with the painful parts of our past. Furthermore, we need to ensure that we do not repeat the mistakes or actions of the past order. Memory and memorialization remain important avenues through which people, individually and collectively, remember and preserve their past and locate their present positions and aspiration in what has recently been conceptualized as working towards social cohesion and nation building. It is our belief as the democratic government that we should tell our story and not wait for others to do it for us. This gathering takes place within the context of keeping the memory of Mama Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke alive, to celebrate and appreciate her immense contribution to the birth of our democratic dispensation, and to acknowledge that indeed we stand on the shoulders of giants like this one. Mama Charlotte Maxeke is well known as the first Black woman from South Africa to hold a BSc degree from the University of Wilberforce in the United States of America, and for exceptional contribution to the struggle for women's and workers' rights and her lifelong dedication to the struggle for peace and justice. In executing their religious task together with her husband, Reverend Marshall Maxeke, they found themselves in the Eastern Cape amongst Abatembu under King Dalindyebo. During their stay in the Eastern Cape, amongst the places they went on to teach and evangelize was the Tembuland under King Dalindyebo. It was here that Maxeke participated in the King's Court, a privilege unheard of for a woman at the time. In his unpublished work written in 1930, titled What an Educated African Girl Can Do, former President General of the African National Congress, Dr. A.B Xuma, made the following observation about Mama-Maxeke. I quote, "It was during this time that Mrs. Charlotte Maxeke became endeared and ingratiated to the whole tribe of Abatembu. I've often heard my father speak of her courage and eloquence, she being one of the few women whose voice was heard in the chiefs among men and who had influence in council. So far as African native life and custom are concerned, this alone speaks volumes for her ability and is really a mark of distinction. She was here given the name Nogazo as salutation," I end quote. Many of Maxeke's concerns were related to social issues, as well as ones that concerned the church. Charlotte wrote about the political as well as social issues that women face in isiXhosa. In the writing piece, Umthetheleli Wabantu, she wrote about these specific issues. In 1928, the Maxekes decided to resettle in the area of Johannesburg. It was during her final settlement in Johannesburg that the government of the day nodded to her stature and ability. She was asked by the Minister of Education to come and testify before several government commissions in Johannesburg on matters concerning African education, another first for an African of any gender. Her brilliant and creative responses to the questions put to her resulted in a number of racial boundary crossing job offers, the first of their kind ever made by the white government to an African. She gave hope to the dejected, and her life was an inspiration to all. She was a wife, mother, educationist, religious leader, social welfare worker, political activist, and benefactor of humanity. The Cape Argus of the time had this to say about her. I quote, "Ever since Mrs. Maxeke has been in Johannesburg, she has lived in close touch with her own people, many of whom she has been able to help. Recognizing the value of her work among them, the government has now created for her the post of welfare worker, which she holds under the Native Affairs Department." For Mrs. Maxeke, who in her own person proves the development of which her people, given opportunities, are capable, has all through life retained a pitiful heart for the least of them. There's not one amongst them so down and out or so debased that she will treat her as an outcast or of no account. The white-owned media of the time, known for its stance towards the African cause, was forced by her intellectual ability to concede that her case for the African people is unchallengeable. She was an individual whose every action was expressive of her extraordinary intellect, diligence, determination, courage, dedication to the highest ideals and principles. We are certain that her values and beliefs will inspire our women to greatness, advance our collective cause, and ensure that the memory and legacy of our liberation heroines are promoted and preserved. On her passing in 1939, S.E.K. Mqhayi wrote the following poem as a tribute to Mama Maxeke, titled Umfikazi uCharlotte Maxeke, says the following: "Shukumani bafazi, ushenxile umama hiqihiqi, ufinyisa amahhuqu, ushenxile kade sakhumzi, ekutshula ihanga namanxila, egodusa amahilihili agoduke, kubuya amadungudwane emazweni, itshe lesiseko seTopiya, shukumani bafazi." Translated in English, it says, "Stand up, women, the scraper has shifted. The one who removes refuse. Gone is the one who has been building a home, removing the idle and the drunkards, sending home those who like to be away from home, and those who travel without purpose come home, the foundation stone of Ethiopia. Stand up, women." I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Geraldine Fraser Mulikedi, who hails from the Western Cape Belt at a very young age and also sacrificed her education because she left the country whilst studying her second year at the university. And what is also important is that at a very young age, she served in the South African Communist Party in the Central Committee. And after the unbanning, she was highly involved in the mobilization of the society at large, as well as women. She played a very important role in mobilizing young women and ensuring that they understood the African National Congress as well as the party. She was also concerned about the violence in South Africa, and more particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. Comrade Geraldine has also served as a member of the African National Congress Executive Committee and also became a Deputy Minister, first of Welfare, which is now called Social Development, a Minister of Social Development. But also she comes from the struggle family, and she is presently serving in the UNDP, and she started working there on the 2nd of January 2009. Over to you, Dr. Geraldine Fraser Mulikedi. Thank you.
Thank you, President Batabile Dlamini. Thank you to everyone who's with us today during what I call quite a fascinating discussion. A discussion, as was indicated, both by the President of the Women's League, as well as Phoebe Potgieter, and I think the various young intellectuals who have joined us here today. And it would be remiss of me if I don't, in a very special way, recognize as well Dr. Tozama April, for the contributions and your contribution to the discourse around the life of Mum Charlotte Maxeke, and more so the engagement with Dr. A.B Xuma. I think it's a very interesting one. But let me start out, President of the Women's League, I must say this. Right now, amongst other things, I'm the Chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University. And the one thing that we are very proud of as a university is that there is a new National Research Foundation chair that's called the Saki Research Chair in Humanities. And this chair looks at feminist imaginations. We've got the good fortune of having this occupied by Professor Pumla Godla, she's from the Center of Women and Gender Studies, and it's the second chair to be awarded in the humanities faculty, and this was done in a matter of 2 months. But let me come to the matter at hand today. And when I looked at this, I listened to the engagements by everyone, the passion by Rofiwa when she put out a challenge to young people, the prayer that came from Reverend Sophie Tembu, where I actually wondered, if Mum Charlotte was in the room today, what would she have said to Dr. Xuma? And I raise this because we do this in an environment where I think many of us are quite envious that our forebear, in the form of Charlotte Maxeke, sat at the feet and under the tutelage, amongst others, of W.E.B. Du Bois. And I think if we look at it, and I thought I'd raise one quote of Du Bois and ask myself, would this have come up in a conversation between the two presidents had they been alive today? And that's Maxeke and Xuma. And I thought the one question that Du Bois raised was the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And I thought the two of them would actually say that it is still a problem at this particular point in time. And this problem is intersectional. It cuts across many things, including the discussion today around the role of Mam Charlotte, and how, if I could borrow some words from Dr. Tozama April, and I'm not going to do her justice in any way, but she reminded us today that Maxeke reordered the narrative that was there around not only gender, but the understanding thereof. And I think everyone here today, and I'm going to come back to the issue of reordering, everyone today spoke about various aspects of her life. And I'm going to reflect on what Xuma's responses may have been. And I think the one question that comes through very strongly is the intellectual contributions of Charlotte Maxeke. And I think very clearly through the discussion and discourse today, whether it's the words that came through Minister Nathi Mthethwa, or what Lebu Matlare raised, to a large degree, the view is that this has been understated or not brought to prominence to the extent to which it should. We were also reminded that this was captured, and this is where Xuma would have responded, where he was very clear that she made an enormous impact on the influence on social and political lives of Africans in the 1920s and 1930s. And the resonance thereof still rings today. We spoke about, and this reference was made quite repeatedly, where he, in his writings, reflected on this. And he spoke about it in the context, acknowledged the significance in the context of his book on what an educated native girl can do, that was published in the 1930s. But we feel, and the discussion today says this should be stretched further, because after all, he was also a student of Charlotte Maxeke. So those are two areas that I simply highlight. The linkages were also made, and this is something that Phoebe Potgieter spoke to quite a bit, where she spoke about, and I'll use the word, the fact that there's been an invisibilization of women in history, the writing out of women, and there's a need to write them back in. And hence, when I look at that point that's being made, also about the reordering of the narrative, it also speaks to the point that Tozama makes, that to a large degree, in terms of this issue of reordering the narrative, and I mean, she did this way back. It almost goes counter to the narrative that suggests that the role of women in the liberation movement was that of more of a support role. And we see through the writings of Tozama as well about women as the wife of, this partner, as someone in the support network. And it doesn't really speak about the women who played an active role as combatants. And when I trained as a member of Umkhonto weSizwe in 1981, in particular in Angola, we were 4 women in the camp, and yes, there was a battalion at that point in time, so more males than women. But the role of women there, and this is also with thanks to the fact that there was a reordering so much earlier, was not one of a support role. We weren't working in the kitchen, never did. We were training in order to be able to engage with the appropriate skills in the areas in which we were deployed thereafter. So the whole question of the reordering is also something that makes me say, and this is again what the 2 presidents will raise, how do we ensure that the story is written, that we tell her story, and that President Xuma will say that don't forget that there were major roles, and this impacted on the social life, it impacted on religion as well, in terms of her role from a missionary perspective. And mind you, it was a very challenging role. And some of the issues raised may have made some of us uncomfortable about the manner in which she raised it. But the reality is that she impacted on the social order and the way in which it was presented at that point in time. So we also saw the feminist beyond what was narrowly presented. So without a question, her story is extraordinary. And I'm not going to go back into the history about when and how she got to Wilberforce College. That has been stated very clearly. But we also need to amplify the fact that here was someone, and this is in the words of Comrade President Batabile, where she says she wasn't just an intellectual, she was an activist. And she wasn't just the activist who was amplifying issues. She was a trade unionist. She was the cultural activist that challenged particular approaches. She did look at issues in a very different way, and not just in urban areas, but in rural areas. So she would say to Xuma, if she was there here today, she would say to him, President Xuma, we still have a problem with the youth. And not a problem with the youth, but around the issue of the youth. She would go further to say that we've moved considerably on education, but not far enough. We need to do more. Because in 2021, we still have too many firsts when we should have had so many more, because the firsts were there in the 20s and around that time. So as was mentioned here earlier today, she was a feminist, she was a rebel, she broke the glass ceiling. And now I want to put myself into the room when she attended the first, the founding conference of the ANC, the conference of the African National Native Congress. And she was the only woman there, and there was a debate about her presence. And you can imagine that in 2021, there are still moments when in certain fora, in boardrooms, and now I serve on boards of listed companies, where there are still those who want to make you feel as though you should either be special or you should see yourself as an exception. Because you see, exceptionalism is praised. And I think she challenged them there. And it was Xuma who came in her defense to actually ensure that she remained there. But it was because of the argument she presented. And it was based on the credentials that she had. And the credentials is based on her work on the ground. And the fact that she did not stop by being acknowledged as an exception and as a first, but she continued. And you saw this through the various marches she was involved in. The fact that she said there's not going to be any space that I will not be present in. And I will go in and I'll go through doors that some may otherwise call me a quisling about. But someone had to open that particular door at a particular point in time. So, Comrade Phoebe, I want to conclude this by saying that we, in this 150th year, should not only have, or should not see it as writing a forgotten series, but actually ensure that we write her story in order to deal with the fact that there's been a reality about invisibilization of women and the roles of women in history. So a lot else to be said, and I should conclude, lest I overstep too much. But I'd want to conclude, and again, Tozama allowed me to quote from something you had written, where you said, and I quote, Maxeke's theorization of the evolution of Native womanhood highlighted the dynamic character of women, and as such proposed a dynamic approach that refuses to succumb to the stereotypes about women. Framed at a critical stage of the documentation of histories of the liberation struggles in the region, Maxeke's work challenges the archiving of those struggles, close quotes. So yourself and Phoebe are actually speaking to the same thing as so many others are. And as I acknowledge Zubeida Jaffer and the beauty of the heart, I will use that as well to introduce the Premier of the province. And Zubeida in the interview had said she would like to see when her book was actually, when she had the launch of a book, and I think it was in the Eastern Cape. And she was asked something like, what would you like to see? What is the point of the beauty of the heart? So she said, I would like Charlotte Maxeke to be on the lips of everyone and in every home. And it goes to the point that was earlier raised by, I don't know if it was Rufiwa or by someone else, where the stark reminder was the histories that we learn is not the histories of those who should be recognized. So, let me stop on that and say that I want to introduce the Premier, and especially because from what researchers said, and we believe that Tozama is very close to where Mum Charlotte was from or born, but it is said she was born in Fort Beaufort, but that she grew up spent much of her childhood in Uitenhage. So I hand it over now to the Premier, who's from the home of legends, for you to say a few words. Thank you very much, and I hope I've done justice to this august launch of the 150th anniversary, and thank you to the Institute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fraser, the Chancellor of our Nelson Mandela University. Greetings to program directors, Reverend Joyce, who actually Tembu was opening this august occasion with prayer, the president of our Women's League, Comrade Bata, almost all panelists here. We've got quite a number of panelists, Dr. Sisters Ama April, Comrade Phoebe from HQ, Mr. Ndima from Arts and Culture representing Minister, the representatives from Charlotte Maxeke and the Xuma families and the Institute. Distinguished guests, a very good afternoon to you all. Yeah, what a program. How I wish that there were many men here. Surely we need programs of this nature to get into men's heart and men's head for us to understand that year 2021 is the year of Charlotte Maxeke, the year of change, the year of renewal. Thanks so much to the Institute for inviting us to this very important historic dialogue to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Woman Charlotte Maxeke, which of course takes place at a time when we need to be more inspired to overcome the novel coronavirus that is decimating our loved ones, friends, comrades, and colleagues. The two presidents, Charlotte Maxeke, Notatu Alfred Tibatini Xuma, who are the subject matter of our dialogue today, were resilient in the face of colonial adversity. Hence, we must draw lessons from their fortitude to overcome our common adversary of COVID-19 and return to our national democratic revolution task of building a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. I've listened attentively to all speakers and participants in the dialogue. All of them have enriched us with important insights which we should use to become better leaders. We must therefore commit, not with our words, but with our deeds, to emulate the noble deeds of Umamu Charlotte Maxeke and Dr. A.B Xuma, and live by the value systems they ascribed to. As the Eastern Cape, we are particularly honored to be associated with names of these two towering revolutionary titans that are linked to the most remote parts of our province, the Fort Beaufort as well as Ingcobo. They are yet another generation of heroes and heroines that our province has produced over time, who took the revolutionary task of freeing us from colonialism and apartheid, following, of course, in the giant footsteps of our kings, who led wars of resistance against European settlers. We take great pride and joy in the fact that at various stages of our struggle against colonialism and later apartheid, our province blessed our nation with courageous individuals who led from the front during very difficult times, risking their lives for the good cause of liberating us from the bondage of colonialism and apartheid. We locate Charlotte Maxeke at the apex of our struggle for the liberation, in that at the very birth of the ANC in 1912, she attended that formal launch of the ANC, and 6 years later, in 1918, led the formation of Bantu Women's League, which became a branch of the ANC. So the dialogue we just had was about a revolutionary, a pioneer, a leader who not only fought for our liberation, but who also pioneered the fight against patriarchal injustices. We draw similarities between Charlotte Maxeke and the President A.B Xuma, in that they were leaders of great intellect without really going deeper into their academic achievement. It is safe to highlight that they paved the way for many Black Africans to pursue education as a weapon to defeat poverty and obstacles that were put in place by the colonialists. Hence, another great legacy we pride ourselves with in the Eastern Cape is that we educated many great African minds. What is clear, Program Director, from the inputs of various speakers today who spoke about the President Maxeke and President Xuma, is that as the current generation, we have a big shoes to fill. We must understand that we are born of generation of gallant fighters, a phenomenal human beings who discovered their mission and fulfilled it. The question we must answer is, when we look back in the period we have led in government between 1994 to date, will they be proud of what we have been doing? Will they be proud at the pace of our work to return the land to its original owners? Will they be proud to see the widening gaps of inequalities? Will they be proud to see that even today the labor sending provinces such as the Eastern Cape are still having challenges of infrastructure which impact on the quality of livelihoods? Will they be proud of the downward spiral our nation has descended to, of a society that abuses women and children? Will they be proud of the sideshows that the members of their own organization, the ANC, are engaged in, which has nothing to do with the mission and the vision of the ANC that was formed in 1912? We have a lot to ponder, and this dialogue will certainly inspire those of us who want to effect positive development in our country. May the undying spirit of President Charlotte Maxeke and President Utatu Xuma continue to guide us to do the right things in pursuit of the goal of better life for all of our people. Well done to the Institute for keeping Maxeke legacy alive. We really appreciate this kind of program, and indeed, I repeat, how I wish more men were actually invited here to be today schooled by very capable women of our country, young and old. I'm so privileged. I'm quite happy to be part of this program today. Thank you very much, program directors. I would have done that one easily because this is where I come from. Thank you very much, Program Director. The next speaker is, his name is Teteli Xuma, a descendant of Amampondomise, Amajola clan from Engcobo, Kumanzane, where Dr. A.B Xuma was born. He's one of the few remaining elders, but he's a young elder in that family, I must say. We were lucky that we were there with the President when we were doing a reburial of Dr. Xuma, where the President has actually given an honor to the family. Over to you, Comrade Ray Xuma.
I'm fine now. Am I audible now? Okay. Yes, thank you very much, program directors, both program directors. Let me, as the Dr. A.B Xuma family, welcome the opportunity, and let me thank the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Comrade Oscar Mawiane, for introducing myself. And let me greet all the speakers, the President of the African National Congress Women's League, Dr. Fraser Mleketi, and all the other speakers, the representative of the Department of Arts and Culture. As the Dr. A.B Xuma, we are very much happy to get this opportunity to reflect on the life and times and also the contributions made by both the leaders of the African National Congress, Dr. A.B Xuma and Mannya-Maxeke. Mannya-Maxeke was a brave leader at that time, of which us also as this generations, we can emulate their actions and also use them as this generation in our space now. Most of us, we can learn from her legacy. I think Mannya-Maxeke was a leader. We can use his leadership skills in our generation also to educate our youth now to be kind and also to be human, and also to every time to work for the poor people in our lifetime. Just like Dr. A.B Xuma, she liked the education, and I think both of them, education as our own organization and also the country, put the education the priority. That resonates with them very well. She was a very human. Mannya-Maxeke mentored and molded Dr. A.B Xuma while they were at Wilberforce College. She was also a leader who wanted that everybody should work together. In other words, she wanted unity. In the 1940s, Dr. Xuma made sure that the women were fully recognized in the African National Congress. And that was the aspiration of Mannya-Maxeke all along. Mannya-Maxeke, as the leader of the Bantu Women's League, she wanted that the women should play a pivotal role in the struggle, in the liberation, and also in the fighting of the colonial system. So the colonial system that was there to block the people of African culture to be prosperous. Both Mannya-Maxeke and Dr. Xuma made sure that they attained education while it was difficult. They went abroad so that they changed the situation in the country, in South Africa, and also they also become the inspiration in our youth. I think their efforts can be used now to encourage youth now to take education seriously, because without education, we cannot go anywhere. Let me put this now. In our country, also, hence we are also fighting the ills of the apartheid at the time. So our country now is faced with the triple challenges. That is now the poverty, unemployment, and inequality, of which both leaders were fighting that there must be employment, we should alleviate poverty and also inequality. Mannya-Maxeke contribution was far excellent in fighting colonialism. She wanted that the women should be in the forefront of fighting colonialism. So, program director, in my conclusion, I think in our generation now, we can use the values of Mannya-Maxeke, the humility, the to become the educationist, the feminist, so that our youth now can be progressive. I thank you very much. Program Director.
Thank you, Program Director. On behalf of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute, I would like to express our gratitude for all the support and also the participation by our guests this afternoon. Thank you to the Premier of Eastern Cape, home of legend, Honorable Oscar Mabuyane, for all the time, for your time to be with us this afternoon. As we all know that Eastern Cape is the home of legend, but also Eastern Cape is the home of Mayor Charlotte Maxeke. We will be connecting with your office in regards to 2021 program for the Eastern Cape province. We also treasure all our special guest speakers this afternoon, our upright and principal leaders, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, Chancellor of NMU, the GM of our ANC headquarters, Comrade Phoebe, and also Dr. Tozama April, a scholar of note. Extending to our ambassador, Dr. Musawenkosi, ambassador of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute, ANC Women's League Young Desk representative, Dr. Rufiwe, family rep, Lebo Matare. We value everyone who have made this program a success. Our partners, AME Church, Reverend Tembu, and also the family of Dr. A.B Xuma, represented by Mteteli Xuma. And also, as we all know, that the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, under the leadership of Honorable Minister Natim Tetwa, are the custodian of this initiative, the 150th celebration, and also as it was declared by our movement ANC that it is the year of Charlotte Maxeke. 2021 is the year of Charlotte Maxeke. We also cherish the partnership with the Department of Arts, of Sports, Arts and Culture, and also appreciate Isikhathi Sababu Vusindima this afternoon. President Bathabile Dlamini, I'm not too sure if you understand the hectic program we're going to have this year in 2021. But what I know is that you've been a driving force behind the preserving and the celebration of women icons, especially Charlotte Maxeke as the first president and the founder of Bantu Women's League, the forerunner of the ANC Women's League. We want to continue to work with the ANC Women's League in making sure that this year is not only the year of Charlotte Maxeke, but also other women icons, and make sure that we elevate and redefine the history of women. So we extend our hand once again to the ANC Women's League to work and make sure that the history of women is at another level after conclusion of the celebration this year. Thank you, everyone. Also, I want to thank Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke Institute Board, Moketsi Maxeke and Mamu Olga Sema, and also extending to the dynamic team that has made this event a success. Let us keep safe, let us keep healthy, let us pray also to turn the corner as we are facing this big challenge of COVID-19. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Ngosi siyabulela.